And I met him serendipitously, but he had gotten killed in India prior to me meeting Ram Dass. And I love this man. I mean, we became buddies. I would go hiking with him and talk to him. I just loved him. He was a brilliant scholar and a good-hearted soul. And I said, I want to know if Sham's okay. And here's what happens. Ram Dass looks at me, and he knew, because Sham would go every year to hang out with Ram Dass. They were buddies, much longer associated than I was with either one. And he puts his hand on his third eye like this, and he goes like this. Sham is with Krishna. Now, Krishna to him was God, Jesus, whatever you want to call it, but he was with the source. Let me put it that way. Sham is with, he's fine. And then, Bernie, then an apparition appears in the room, and it's Sham Dass. Blew me away, smiling at me to let me know he's fine. And my grief lifted. I went from crying to joy.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman. I'm a psychiatrist. I love studying meaningful coincidences, and I got a book coming out that's going to be about the coincidences of my life, and trying to be able to say something about how my coincidences have something to do with your coincidences, because what seems to happen is that we tend to think of our stories as being unique, and they are. They're unique to us. But if you're having them, then other people are having them. And what they tell us is that we're much more part of the same pattern and evolution than we think we are. We're not that unique. We're special to our friends. We're special to ourselves, but not that much, because that happens to me. It's going to probably happen to you, already has. That's what I keep finding out. Happens to other people. And Ken is no stranger to that idea. And Ken Harris is our guest today. I've known Ken for quite a while. And there's a lot to learn from Ken as he keeps learning. But one of the things that has stuck with me that's so relatively unique to him is strangers to him are not strangers. Strangers to him are not strangers. They really are his friends. He just hasn't met them yet. I love that one. Everyone that I meet is going to teach me something, says Ken Harris. And we'll both probably learn something in this conversation today. I don't know. We're both in a place we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we know we never will, but it's trying to figure out what we can't figure out about what's going on. So Ken is a holistic healer, a pioneer in holistic healing. He's a chiropractor, published author, workshop presenter, and definitely a keynote speaker. He's the founder of the Waldwick Wellness Center in New Jersey, a multi-doctor facility providing all natural health and wellness care since 1975. So he was pretty early on the scene. I know him through his book, Synchronicity, the Magic, the Mystery, and the Meaning. And he's also edited a more recent book called Second Chances: From Surviving to Thriving, Surviving to Thriving. And he's one of those guys who was almost dead. And as you can see, he ain't dead. But it was close. It was close. And a nice bunch of synchronicities happened that made it so he's still with us. And I'm glad that is the case. So Ken, welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. It's great to see you.
Oh, thank you, Bernie. It's great to see you. And there's no accident that how I even met you is synchronistic. So
I forget how that happened. I forget.
Yeah, so I had a massage therapist working in my office, and he knew I was in the process of writing a book. And he says, you got to check this guy, Dr. Beitman. Did you ever hear of him? I said, no, I never heard of him. He's really, I think, in your wheelbase. He's right where you are, Kenny. And so I looked you up, And then, as fate would have it, I met Amalia, or her name is Eon Harris, at the same time, and she told me that she was part of the Coincidence Project. I said, "Oh, the guy's telling me to look you up." I meet this woman, Eon Harris, and the way I met Eon was both her book and my book, same title, Synchronicity, pops up on Amazon. And I take that as a sign I should reach out to this woman. And when I do, she tells me about you. And that's how I became connected to the Coincidence Project originally.
And it just so happens that your book covers have similar designs on them, which also helps make the thing happen. So that's a nice illustration of how coincidences bring people together if you notice them and if you then act on them. So noticing, being curious, seeing what they might mean, and then the key part is acting, and you did. And you did. So you wrote the synchronicity, the magic, the mystery, and the meaning. And while we're talking about this, and that's now, and it'll all be over by the time when this is published. But let's talk about what's going on now. The Yankees, the New York Yankees baseball team, has a chance of getting into the World Series again, which is a bad habit the Yankees have. I was a Cleveland Indians fan for many years, so we didn't like the Yankees. And the Yankees look like they got a chance, but that's not important right now for us. You had an experience at Yankee Stadium that was very profound for you. I think you were around 12. And then tell us about that, because that's what got you started in writing your book.
Yeah, people often ask me, Ken, why did you write a book on synchronicity? I said, well, I had a major synchronicity that blew me away. I was 14, Bernie, not 12. But anyway, I'm telling you, the audience will understand why. So I gotta laugh. I'm out in a place in Long Island called Shelter Island, which is between the North and the South Fork of Long Island. And my wife's family lives in East Hampton. So she says, let's go down and visit the family, take some rides on the waves in East Hampton, because there are no waves on Shelter Island. Shelter Island is in the bay. So we get off the ferry in a town called Sag Harbor, which is part of the Hamptons, and the road bifurcates. It goes one way to East Hampton, and another way it goes to a town called Amagansett. I made a boo-boo, I think, and I wind up in this town called Amagansett, which is adjacent to East Hampton. But if you know anything about the Hamptons, folks, it could take you 2 hours to go 3 miles. So I said to my beautiful wife, I said, listen, honey, same water, same sand. Let's make the best of a mistake. And this stay here. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. There's virtually no one on the beach. So we set up Camp Harris. We're real beachgoers. 2 umbrellas, 2 chairs, ocean view. Half hour later, this guy comes. You're laughing. So he knows the story. A half hour later, this guy comes down on a cane, and he's barely able to walk. And where do you think he decides to sit? Right next to me, literally next to me. And I
And the
look over.
beach, the beach is pretty
There's no one on the beach. And I'm saying, my South Bronx mentality is saying, maybe ask this guy to move. He's obstructing my view, my ocean. But the soul, you see, there's always the voice of the soul. There's the voice of the ego. What's in it for me? There's the voice of the soul. How can I help? I said, sir, let me help you. Did you have your hip replaced? I realized that he couldn't go any further. He says, yeah, how do you know? I said, well, I'm a chiropractor. I took care of people like you, blah, 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 blah. No, I'll do it myself. I said, okay, enjoy the time. He doesn't say a word to me. And I let him alone. Half hour later, he goes to get back up, struggles on the cane. Only this time he puts on a New York Yankee cap. I said, oh, I'm going to make his day. I'm going to tell him about my Yankee Stadium. So I proceed to tell him, I said, sir, you like the Yankees? He says, yeah, I love the Yankees. That's why I'm wearing a hat. And he wasn't very friendly. I said, well, I'm going to tell you a story. You're going to think I made it up, or you're going to believe me. So here's my story. Here's my backstory, folks. At age 14, we won the championship of the New York Mirror Little Fellas League. There used to be 3 papers in New York, the Mirror, the Post, and the Daily News. We won, and as a consolation, we got an opportunity to play a 3-inning exhibition game, night game, in Yankee Stadium before the Kansas City Athletics and the New York Yankees. Now, here, I'm 14 years old. I think I'm going to become the next Mickey Mantle. Baseball is my life. And I'm in the dugout with Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, Muskow, and Whitey, for the whole dream team of the Yankees. I'm the third batter. I was a really good batter. Get up, and to right center field, they brought the fence in 200 feet. I hit a home run. And I'm taking the trot around the thing. And my mother, thank God, was there. She knew it happened, but we didn't have cameras to prove it at the time. You know, she had to swear on the Bible to my kids. They didn't believe me. They said, "Oh, Pop's making it up." Anyway, I tell this guy this story. His name is, I come to find out his name is Richie. And I go through the whole story and he says, stop. I said, "Sir, are you a Yankee fan or a Boston guy? What, you don't like the story?" He goes, "You're Kenny Harris." I said,
Ah,
I mean, folks, I'm wearing a bathing suit. I don't have a name tag." He says, I said, "You know me? How do you know me?" He says, "Oh, I know that story." I said, "How do you know that story?" He says, "Because I'm Richie. I was on your team. I hadn't seen him in 54 years." What? I couldn't believe. I was high-fiving him. We both got excited. And the reason I met him, there was meaningful coincidence. I said, "Richie, why did you come to the beach today here?" He says, "Well, Ken, I can't explain it. I was on my way to Montauk, which is at the end of Long Island, but my car
ah,
all of a sudden goes down Atlantic Avenue. Nostalgically, I want to take one last look at the beach in Amagansett because many years we rented houses here, and this was our favorite spot." I said, "Richie, so did I." I had never met him until that day. All right. I mean, we both were on the same street for years, but never ran across each other until that day. And I happened to tell him that story. The backstory is I wound up helping him. He was scheduled for spinal surgery, and that's why we met. The universe conspired, whatever you want to believe, folks, set up all the details for us to meet serendipitously, synchronistically, coincidentally. But there was meaningfulness behind our encounter. And that's when I said, you know what? I'm not the only person having these kinds of experiences. Let me write a book about them. And I started recalling. I had a good memory. I had so many, but never like that. That was the wow. I said, okay, I'll do it. And here we are.
there's a couple of very important clear ideas that you're describing, Kenny. There's each of you got lost in a way. You took the wrong turn, and there's a principle of coincidences that you get lost or go the wrong way. Uh, Stuff can happen. That's how I went the wrong way when I was 9 and found my dog who was lost. And that has stayed with me as a principle that it ain't so bad when you get lost. You get thrown out into uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, there's potential. What people talk about as random is not so random. Random is the place, the kind of space and whatever's going, whatever you call it, in which new stuff can happen. So you go to the beach and and a guy happens to be wearing a Yankees hat, and he can't get any further than where you are. And you'd both gotten there by kind of mistake. And then you do the who are you, I'm me, and you get to the story. He recognizes you from the story because he was on your team. But probably the most important part of this, as much of the as it's the fun of it, the kind of wow of it, is that you were able to help him, that your skills allowed him to have a different direction of treatment that was better for him.
Yes.
And that's what makes this a really wow coincidence because yeah, I got lost. Yeah, you had a story in common. Yeah, you were on a team together, but you, his teammate, were able to hit another home run, this time for him.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, Bernie. You're absolutely correct. We both wound up at the right time, at the right place for the right reason, unbeknownst to either one of us, consciously.
Yeah, yeah, and whether whether we like it or not, it tickles our curiosity to wonder how that happens. And you've got some ideas about how that stuff happens. So why don't you just tell us how you think, not that you know,
Yeah.
how this wonderful synchronicity took place.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. What the why, and I think you wrote a book about this, the why of synchronicity, or that's your new book coming out. And I don't think the anyone knows definitively how and the why. We know how to engage people, but why do we engage them? Why do we tell them certain stories? When we do, I don't know that. My suspicion is that you and I and the rest of the 8 billion human beings are having a subconscious conversation all the time. As Carl Jung would say, the collective unconsciousness. We're having this conversation, but it's not beknownst to us. We're telepathically, we're subconsciously talking to one another without words, but with our thoughts. And so the universe has infinite possibilities, and the universe is infinitely intelligent. And it will transect or intersect at the right time, at the right place, people for sometimes what they should be doing next, and sometimes what you shouldn't be doing next. So I always tell people stay aware, awake, and alert. The universe is conscious. We're all part of it. It's speaking to us and through us. That's how I think synchronicities would happen on some level. Sometimes you can perseverate on an idea and keep thinking about it. So we know thoughts are electrical in nature, and feelings are magnetic fields. So if you can neural link a thought with a feeling, you got a Wi-Fi. And that goes into the field and somehow draws unto us that which we've been thinking about. But it's all not conscious. Many of my synchronicities, I'm sure, have happened because of subconscious. As we know that Carl Jung says, synchronicity is when the unconscious becomes conscious. And so I think that's one explanation. Energetically, we're in the matrix. Like you said, we're all connected in some way. And the universe will decide when, where, and how, and what. But you got to stay aware, awake, and alert and make the connect. You got to connect the dots. I saw the Yankee hat. That was my thing. I tell him Yankee Stadium store. The guy's hurting. I didn't know he was on my team. He blew me away when he said that, by the way. I was like, I got up, I hugged him, we were high-fiving. We were so happy to see. We would never have recognized each other. He and I did not look like we did when we were 14 years of age. Guaranteed.
And
It was,
that emotional hit is so much a part of the bigger coincidences, or they what help make it a synchronicity. When we talk about meaning, one of the meanings in a synchronicity is what you felt with that guy and he felt with you. That's meaningful feeling, and you had that. And very much appreciate your way of thinking about how it might have happened. You like to invoke the ambiguous idea of the universe, which people have different names for when you're talking about it. But because you're a guy who puts your hands on people, you also know reality exists, and you also know this reality, and you also know that energy exists, and you also know that telepathy is a real thing, and you also know that human beings are interconnected, because that's what synchronicity continues to tell us. And you also know that the subconscious mind is operating all the time, picking up stuff. So it's easy for me to use the term internal GPS, where he was able to track you where you were, and somehow you knew complementary where he needed to be. So rather than crawl out to one of the Hamptons, you took a turn, and he went on Atlantic, and he also was there. And this is all this we have our GPS in our cars. Birds have GPSs, fish have GPS in their own internal makeup. Why wouldn't we be having some form of that, where we are able to find what we need in ways that we're subconsciously not aware of? But what you just said, and Jung has said, the Jung that synchronicity makes the subconscious unconscious, conscious.
Right.
And taking it a little further, it makes our interpersonal connectedness yet more clear.
Absolutely. I love that idea of the GPS. You know, and I think it lives in our heart chakra. I think the GPS is here somehow, and the heart knows faster than when the brain can figure it out. You know, it
Go
means
ahead with
go ahead, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead with that. I'm curious about
Well,
that.
GPS, I think, means global positioning system,
Correct.
right? But as you're talking, I was saying, and I'm not religious, folks, but I'm going to use the word God positioning system. Something beyond us, something beyond our conscious mind puts us at the right time in the right place. If we're open. And my attitude, as I told you as we began this conversation, is that we're already connected. And when I meet someone, they're not strange to me. I genuinely love people and I engage them in a loving way. I'm always amazed at what I get back. I'm just like, oh, I don't take it for granted, not one iota, Bernie. But everyone is a student or a teacher to me in some way. And sometimes it goes both ways. Sometimes it's one way, me to them, sometimes them to me. And it's all good. But we are one consciousness. You know, I had an experience with this guy named Ram Dass. You know who Baba Ram Dass was? Richard
Of
Alpert.
course, Richard
Yeah,
Alpert.
yeah. Well, you know, but the young people, when I
Yeah,
mention Ram
they
Dass,
don't know. To describe Richard Alpert was a psychologist at Harvard who got involved with this bad guy named Timothy Leary, who was also a psychologist at Harvard, and they got into psychedelics and did a no-no, which was give psychedelics to undergraduates at Harvard, which they weren't supposed to be doing. And another person of that era, who was a old friend of mine, Andrew Weil, was a reporter for the Harvard Crimson, and he reported this awful event, and they got busted out of Harvard, and that was one of the best things that ever happened to either one of them.
right, he got
So you
fired.
and you've come to know Richard Alpert or Baba Ram Dass, who wrote it's still around. People read it. Oh, still reading it. Be here now. Not a bad idea. Be here now.
Yeah.
So
So
you know Richard Alpert.
well, I had a blessing to meet him privately, which was highly unusual. That's a whole other, it's a chapter in my book. But I was out on Maui taking care of Wayne Dyer at the time. And no one else knew about where he was, but he told me where I could find him. And so through a series of synchronistic events, I got his phone number from a guy in New Jersey who was a devotee of him. And my flight gets canceled and I don't think he's going to call me back because I left two messages. And sure enough, as soon as the flight got canceled, the secretary calls me, come. So I'm laughing. I said, oh, a deviation here. I'm not going home to New Jersey, but I'm going to go see Ram Dass. So I remember going to have an audience with him. And I'll tell you, I was in the presence of a lot of highly evolved souls. But when I walked into that room with him, I got stoned. I went into an altered state of consciousness. And what a loving presence, what a loving expression of life he was. Here he was in diapers, in a wheelchair, paralyzed, and he had aphasia. He could speak and then stop, speak and then stop. But what I experienced with him was totally telepathic communication, where we'd look at each other and we were having the conversation without saying one word out of our lips. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. It was my first direct experience of telepathy, where I could,
Could you describe that in as much detail as you can? And the reason I'm asking you is because that's the future of human communication, what you're just describing.
okay, so our eyes were locked. It was through our eyes. There was a stillness, there was a total present time consciousness. There was no one else in the world but just he and I in that moment. And he could talk and then he'd stop and he'd look at me and he had the most beautiful blue eyes. And I could hear what he was thinking, even though he wasn't speaking it. And that was disarming for me. And what's even more disarming, now your folks are going to really think this guy's cuckoo. The reason I went to see him, I was never a devotee of Ram Dass. I knew who he was and what he did, but I wasn't a guru follower. As a matter of fact, I didn't like gurus personally. I didn't like other people who tell me what to do. You know, I didn't like anybody telling me what to
No
do.
kidding.
Yeah. And I had that same thing with Wayne Dyer. He didn't want. I took care of him. He says, "Hey, you're telling me what to do?" I said, "Well, you asked me to be your doctor. I'm going to tell you what to do. You don't have to do it." And he said, I don't like that word, no, but he learns it. Anyway, bottom line was, I just I was disarmed by being in his physical atmosphere. When I drove back to see my wife, I don't remember driving back home. I mean, I was in an altered state of I was on another channel. Let me put it that way. And we had such a loving exchange, he and I. That day we both cried. We both cried together. We hugged each other. I never met the man before until that moment. But there was such a resonance, such an inner knowingness of connection. And I was just so blissed out. I was literally blissed out by being, he changed my field forever, being in that private meeting with him on Maui. What a sweet, sweet soul. He lived another, I think after that, another 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then he checked out. But I was so thankful that I got to see him. And it was, again, plane gets canceled, and then boom, the invite comes.
Yeah, that's another one of those taking the wrong turn kind of thing. For our listeners and audience to be able to recognize the opportunity that comes from when something you want to have happen doesn't happen, then that's a time to be open rather than closed, because there are potential opportunities in what, again, might sound like random, but in random, there is opportunity. And it's one of the hardest things for people to recognize, that random is not the random that we think it is. It's the seedbed for potential great things to happen if we want to become involved with it. Now, I want to get back to your actual conversation with him. You were looking in each other's eyes. You were entranced
Yes.
with him. You were in the same space. Yeah, you were, let's say, one with him, um, which I love being able to do that with people. It happens to me on the dance floor occasionally, and it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. More than this dance experience where it's more energetic and there's some telepathic. There's you just said you heard him talk to you. You heard his words in your mind. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it wasn't audible. It wasn't an audible
Yeah.
hearing through the ears. No, there was an intuitive knowing what he was telling me by looking at me.
In terms of, there were words that you were intuitively knowing.
Yes. So we could have
As
this conversation. Yeah, we continued to talk, and then he'd come back into the spoken word and talk a little bit, and then he'd go into aphasia because of his stroke, and then he would just tell me the rest mentally. That's the best way I could describe it. But here's what really blew us away. He said, "What can I do for you today, Ken? Why are you here?" And I looked at him. I says, "I don't know." I said, "But I just knew I was supposed to meet you." But I said, "Honest to God, I don't know why I'm here." And then, this is where people are going to think we're off the deep end. I got really sad, and the emotion of real sadness came over me. And I said, you and I had a mutual friend when we did. His name was Sham Das, not Ram Das, this young man. And I met him in Costa Rica, this Sham Das. He was a world-renowned kirtan walla. He would write music, speaks 5 languages, brilliant guy. He was really a nice Jewish guy from Connecticut who became a guru. 40 years he lived in India. He lived 6 months there and 6 months in the US of A. His name was Stephen Schaefer. His mother was at the time was the Attorney General of Connecticut, state of Connecticut. But he went off the deep end and became a guru of his own right. And I met him serendipitously, but he had gotten killed in India prior to me meeting Ramdas. And I love this man. I mean, we became buddies. I would go hiking with him and talk to him. I just loved him. He was a brilliant scholar and a good-hearted soul. And I said, I want to know if Sham's okay. And here's what happens. Ram Das looks at me, and he knew because Sham would go every year to hang out with Ram Das. They were buddies, much longer associated than I was with either one. And he puts his hand on his third eye like this, and he goes like this. Sham is with Krishna. Now, Krishna to him was God, Jesus, whatever you want to call it, but he was with the source. Let me put it that way. Sham is with, he's fine. And then, Bernie, then an apparition appears in the room, and it's Shamdas. Blew me away, smiling at me to let me know he's fine. And my grief lifted. I went from crying to joy. I know, listen, folks, you're listening to, he's a psychiatrist. I may need one, but that's what happened. I only can relate to you what happened. I can't explain it.
Ken, I'm going to ask you not to call yourself crazy in the indirect ways that you're doing that, because there's so much evidence for what you've just described. The ability for one human being to know that another deceased human being is okay out there. I've been having conversations with the deceased father of a very good friend of mine, who told me stuff about her that only he and she knew. I couldn't have. So I know this happens, and apparitions are common around the death of someone. It's new to me to hear that Ram Dass could invite him to have a little party with the two of you. That's a new that's a new one, but it's consistent with what the love you were feeling with him and he with you, and but the both of you that had for Shaman, that it was made so it was possible. It was love. It was love that allowed that apparition, his apparition, to be able to show. And I can only ask you, Ken, to be more confident in your talking about experiences like this as very real parts of the human experience. This is you're you're a pioneer, not just in chiropractic and health, but you're a pioneer in experiences like this so that you can tell other people love, apparition can happen, and it can happen.
Right. Right. But people, the average person, unless they've had a direct experience of it, will know about it, but they won't know it. It's almost indescribable in many ways. It's like, Bernie, when I had my heart attack and I was ready to check out, I
Yeah.
thought there was a point during that whole process where I actually met the soul of Ken, not this ego iteration of Ken, but my soul self showed up and said to me, and that was almost audible, Ken, relax. You're not going to die today. You got more work to do. Go back and finish. And I came back into my body. I was in an OBE state at the time when they're working on me. And I said, oh, okay. Back I come. But that was the most intimate experience I've ever had energetically with something other than the ego Ken. I actually felt like I met my true self, whatever that is, my essence. Let me put it that way. I think I'm a soul in a human body, temporary. This is temporary. It's, 50, 80, 100 years, goodbye. But the soul self is eternal somehow. And it was with me, reassuring. I got reassured. It's okay. You're not done. Go back.
And the soul of Bernie Beitman speaking to you now, saying that if experiences like your apparition between and with Ram Dass and you are real, and please have the continuing courage to say, this is me and this is what I experience. And because you experience it, you're going to guess, just like with the Yankee hat, stuff like that happens. It's just further out. But we need at this stage of human development a better connection with the sorts of experiences that you just had with Ram Dass. And I say just had because I experienced it with you now. I could be there with you as you were telling it. I was in the room. He was sitting on the chair. You were talking with him. You were telepathing with him, and the apparition comes to join you. I could feel it. I could see it. And that telepathic kind of communication, it comes from the heart.
Yeah.
But what I'm learning is the yin and yang of heart and mind is the emotion comes from the heart. The mind helps organize it so that we can understand it better. So it's weaker, the mind, but it has ordering capacity to the heart emotions.
Well, you're absolutely right, Bernie. And I had it with my mom when my mom passed on. I was out in Long Island in the hospital with her, and the doctors came in. They said, Catherine, her name was, we're going to offer you this, 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 and this. And she says, no, thank you, doctor. I've lived my life. I'm ready to meet my maker, she says. And she takes the IV. I'll never forget. Takes the IV out, gives it to the doctor. And he walked out dejected like he had failed. And she looks at me, and here's what my mother said to me. I'm going to share this story because this is a powerful one for me too. She says, you know, Kenny, and Kenny was my term of endearment. Kenneth was bad. Ken was okay, but Kenny meant she was loving me. When you can't take care of yourself, there's no point hanging around. And in a voice and a tone like I had never heard, but it was her soul speaking to me. So, okay, we go home, Judy and I, and the next morning we're walking in the park by our house. Now she's in Long Island, I'm in New Jersey. And all of a sudden, Bernie, I see my mother in an apparition again, right in front of me, saying, here's what she said. I've come to say goodbye to you, Kenny. You were the best son I could have ever asked for. And I saw her within a nanosecond of that event. I told Judy, because my hands went up, I said, Judy, here's my mom. She didn't see her. I saw her. and I said, Judy, my mom just said goodbye to me. My brother calls me. I look at my phone, and within 5 seconds, he says, Ken, I just want you to know mom just passed away. I says, I know, Bobby. He says, how do you know? I didn't tell him. I said, well, she came to say goodbye to me, but I never told him what she said. I didn't want to make him feel bad. But that was my experience. What a gift. That was a gift that my mama gave me. And I was a good boy. I was one of those good sons. I took care of my parents the last 10 years of their life in any way, every way, which form you can imagine, materially, spiritually, blah, blah, blah. So, it was so reassuring to have that experience. And I'll never forget, because we went up, my mother, see, I'm half Hebrew and half Christian. And I'm neither really, but that's the heritage I come from. So we go up to light a candle for my mom at a Holy Cross monastery, which I took her to before she died, 6 months before she died. And a nun comes out of the Benedictine order of clergymen, but one nun, and she comes out and says, "What are you doing here today?" So I'm lighting a candle in memory of my mom. And she says, "What was your mother's name?" And I said, "Her name was Catherine Harris." And she does the same thing mom does. She puts her hand to her third eye, and she looks up. She's on the other side. They got her. She's fine. She crossed the river, she tells me, and she's where she's supposed to be. Come on. I mean, again, I never expected that, but it was a great message from beyond the veil. I call it from beyond communication from beyond the veil that separates conscious to subconscious or matter to spirit. There's a connecting substance there between the spirit and form, and so there's a way of penetrating that, and it comes always through the heart chakra. I think we don't know the beyond through our mental, as you said, but it's through the feeling realm. Again, another very reassuring. What a beautiful thing.
Are you communicating beyond the veil with anyone?
Not currently. I don't make a conscious practice of it, but I will. I put the memorial benches in the park for my parents. So on their birthdays, I go down and I sit on the bench and thank them. That's my communication. Thank you for giving me the gift of this lifetime. That's what I tell them. Yeah. But I'm not having like it's just a peaceful place to be. It's got the best real estate in the park. It's on a hill and it looks over the whole park. And it's where my parents took my children, their grandchildren, every week for 10 years. And another time when we did the dedication for that bench, Bernie, there were about 15, 20 people there. We played a little music. I'm about to read a prayer, and play some music. And it was a cloudy, cloudy day. I mean, there was no sun anywhere. All of a sudden, like Close Encounters of the Third Time, I kid you not, a circle in the sky opened up and the sun just came down on all of us and just shone while we were doing the service. And as soon as we finished, closed up and everybody was looking around like, oh, is the sun shining? So I took that as a sign or a symbol that there was an affirmation, confirmation. Thank you for doing this, for remembering us. These are things that, that are not rational, but they happen. And I'm sure, like you say, we're not the only ones. Synchronicity for sure is ubiquitous. Everybody's having them. Most people are just unconscious to them. So you and I help people to remind them that these are happening and pay attention. Your books, my books, and many other books.
One of the problems that some people have is they start feeling that they're super special because they have experiences like this. How do you have you run into people like that?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't feel special. I feel blessed. I feel it was by grace alone that I was given this. I needed to have that reassurance. Other people don't need it. They live in pure faith. There's an inner. They're not looking. But I guess I was like when that guy Christ was on the planet. He had the disciples. There was a guy Thomas. He was the doubting Thomas, right? You know the story. And when Christ appeared to this group of his followers, they were freaking out. And he says, Thomas, give me a hand. He takes Thomas's hand. At least that's what the story tells. I don't know if it happened, and puts it in his side so he could feel him. So I guess I always carried a little bit of it because I was a pretty smart guy, I thought, rational. I was the doubting Thomas. So now life has given me these signs and symbols to remove that doubt that I'm making this stuff up.
Well, I still hear the doubt in you. It comes out when you say, well, maybe they'll call me something. And I'm saying I'm a psychiatrist. I can say, please, no more of that. So I'm adding to the Christ and Thomas touching with you and trying to say, Ken, these are wonderful experiences, and you tell them from your heart. And it allows me and anyone who's listening and watching to be able to feel your mother's presence, to be able to feel the sunshine coming through the clouds while 20 people are gathered around. One of my favorite little versions of that was singing to some trees that I'm friends with, and I put my hands out to be dramatic. And as I did, a leaf fell on my finger, and I was literally touched by that. And it was just being part of that environment. When we let ourselves be part of what we're part of already, to let that happen, which you are doing more and more. And I can see that just in the difference between times I've spoken with you before and now, that you are continuing to become whatever we mean by an expanded being. And the experiences that you're describing are so important for other people to not only hear, but feel, as I am feeling your mother, as I am feeling the love between you and Ram Dass, and apparition of your friend showing up. I'm with you in it. You're telling the story so beautifully and from your heart as well as your mind. So I thank you for being such a wonderful communicator of these experiences.
Well, Bernie, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to come out, you might say, to clear
More.
myself.
Uh,
Yeah. I've been in the closet spiritually, maybe at some level, because quote, I'm a doctor, you're a doctor, and people don't expect quote health professional doctors to be speaking this way. You know, it's not ordinary; it's extraordinary, really.
Eh, This isn't the first time you've not met expectations of other people, Ken.
I'm
Keep
thinking
doing it.
Eben Alexander. I know you know him. I mean,
Yeah.
he had this is, the story of people don't know him. He was a neurologist, right? And
He was
he,
a neurosurgeon. Yes.
yeah, and he poo-pooed all this stuff. And people would come out of surgery and say, I met this, I did that. Oh, yeah, sure, sure. And then it happened to him where he was brain dead. And so he had a quote come out of the closet and share his story, which has affected millions of people actually.
Well, as we have about 15 minutes left, um, I'd like to know, since you are a person who can plan and you created your own center, that shows that you know how to put things together. How do you think about increasing people's awareness of the magic, the mystery, and the meaning of synchronicity?
Well, as you know, Bernie, if you go on Amazon and Google synchronicity, I think there's over 60, 70 books out there now in the world dealing with this subject, coincidence, synchronicity, serendipity. And that's one great way. What we're doing now, podcast, people, I had a guy call me up from, get this, because of you, you don't know this, but I had a guy call me up from Japan. Japan. I get this phone call from Japan. I said, yes. Well, his name is Michael Blodgett. I said, what can I do for you, Michael? He said, I heard you on this podcast with this guy, Bernie Siegel, and I got a synchronicity story I want to tell you. He wound up being a contributor to the second book I curated. I didn't write it. I curated a book called Second Chances from Surviving to Thriving, which you mentioned. And his story was remarkable. I told Michael, write your story. He sent it to me, and I said, I asked him permission, of course, and I put it in the book. His story could be made into a movie where he gets lost on a mountain in Japan, going up to pray for the birth of his new child. They had a very difficult first childbirth. So he wanted to go up to this sacred mountain in Japan on a beautiful weekend. All of a sudden, a snowstorm hits. A blizzard hits the top of the mountain. He gets stranded and lost. He can't find his way back. He's just about ready to give up and die. And his 3-year-old daughter appears to him in an apparition and tells him how to find his way home. She literally tells him, don't go up, go down and turn left. And they found him. And it was in the papers, it was in the newspapers. He had been lost for a week. And he was at his final breath. And his daughter appears in an apparition and guides him home. Can't make this stuff up, folks.
What do you think of that?
I think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I think the love and the connection he had with his family, he went for the right reason to pray for the new baby, but the 3-year-old child that he left behind, she didn't want to be fatherless. She reached out to him. They were looking for him. They knew he was lost because he couldn't call in. I think that's a wonderful subconscious heart-to-heart communication. It wasn't the wife who saved him. It was the daughter. She didn't want to grow up without a daddy, I think. That would be my read on that.
There are other stories. Lillian Fortna Lillian told you some of them where it's a stranger who shows up, somebody they don't know, who somehow helps them. And in this case, it could have been a robbery that she was talking about or he was talking about, but also people being lost like that on a mountain. Someone shows up who is a stranger. I haven't heard this one of the 3-year-old showing up. I like that one. But a stranger shows up. It's called the third man sometimes. It's called the angel sometimes. Shows up, and then you go look for the angel and disappeared. Can't find him. So what we're talking about, Ken, is an experience that is unique and it's life-saving, but also is not uncommon. And that's part of a science of synchronicity that I'm trying to develop by creating descriptive categories so that they aren't just one-off things, but they're part of human experience.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Lillian because she's in the book too, called Second Chances from Surviving to Thriving, how she found a doctor in Europe to perform an operation on her without disfiguring her. She was a model and they were going to go, and she had a tumor, blah, blah, blah. She finds a way over, I think it was to Belgium. I'm not sure. But she found me because she used the same publisher of my book. And one day the publisher held up my book as an example. And here's one of our bestsellers. And so she buys the book, never read the book. She never read the book. She puts it on her shelf in her study because she didn't want to, she was in the process of writing Winks from Above. She didn't want to have my book influence how she was going to write her book. But she did, for whatever reason, was intuited to buy the book, puts it on the shelf. Then she buys another book down the road called The Reluctant Messenger. She puts my book and the Reluctant Messenger book side by side on the shelf, still hasn't read them. Then Lillian becomes a member of my newsletter, and she sees I'm in Naples, Florida. She says, "Oh, Ken, there's another lady who wrote a book like yours, and she's in Naples, Florida. Her name is Candace Sanderson. Why don't you look her up?" Sure enough, I did. And we became like this immediately. And Lillian flew down and spent the 3 or 4 days with us. And then she shows us the picture on her study of Candace's book, my book, side by side. She said, "I don't know why, but I was intuitive to get both your books. And now all 3 of us were collaborative." And Candace, this lady Candace, was a psychologist and very traditionally trained, very, very scientific. And her husband, unfortunately, passes away young. She loses everything. They had a very thriving, what do you call it, real estate development business. She moves to Florida with her children, and all of a sudden starts hearing voices. I mean, she gets these voices in her head, and everything they told her, whatever it was, she was able to verify and research because she was a real scientist, and it was all true. And so she's written 6 best-selling books now on this reluctant. She says, "I was the last person on the planet who ever thought they would be doing something like this." And now she's a channeler, for the other side. So I just love it. The universe is magical, mystical, and it's fun. It's fun too. So the 3 of us became friends.
The idea that it's fun is so important because one of the ways to learn is by having a good time. Uh, and what you've just described with Lillian and the other person is the web that we are all part of, but don't recognize that we are part of it. And being able to highlight Indra's web, however you want to call it. There's all kinds of names for this spider web, which is also a malicious spider web going on in this country and in the world of people trying to control the minds of humanity. It's another web which we need to become aware of, but it's a web that is a reflection of another web that's more positive that you are just describing having happened. I mean, Lillian putting the 2 books next to each other and that they're both in Naples. It's one of those things where if you're not paying attention, you don't act, but she flew down there and now you got a book that came out of it and helped spur this woman on to write her bestsellers. So these webs help. And what you are to me is, let me say, an enzyme, a catalyst, because you love this stuff. Every stranger is a friend you just haven't met yet. And those friends are connected in ways that will be fun for you. So you've developed a playground that you can spot. It's invisible until you are curious and then you act on it. And then you got a book coming out of it and a meeting in Atlanta where you talk about trying to launch the book. So you meet in person some more people, and you are like a web builder or a web acknowledger or a web strengthener. And I think it's important for each of us to know as clearly as we can what our role in all this is. And I'm getting from you a much clearer view of your role as I see it. Now, you're one of those guys who's still going to say, you can't tell me about me and you can't tell me what to do. It's still in you, it's in me too. But as you hear me saying this very respectfully and not trying to push anything on you, and I'm saying that for very good reason, and you might understand, is that what do you think of my view of you?
I'm what's the word? What do I think? More what I feel. I feel honored that you see me in that way. I
Oh,
feel honored.
good.
I know. I feel honored that you're framing it for me in another context. You're seeing me bigger than I see myself. Let me put it that way. In another way.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm able to do that. For a lot, I could list a few reasons, but I'm not going to try. But I'm just glad at this moment that I could reflect back to you what you already know about yourself, but it becomes yet clearer to you when you hear me describe it.
Well, you've had a lot of experience, Bernie. You've been doing this work a long time. You're probably the world's most eminent expert in this whole subject currently living. Maybe Carl Jung came back through you. I don't I don't know when he died and when you showed up, but you're carrying the mantle for this all this conscious work that we're exploring. We're explorers. We're unearthing the matrix. Let me put it that way. We're becoming aware of the interconnectedness of all life.
And thank you for your acknowledgement of my carrying the mantle of this, because I had a lot of trouble with Jung early on for various reasons. But more recently, and he's now in the beginning of the dedication of my next book, is to Carl Jung,
Huh?
because I've been able to recognize that I am not following Jung, I'm following after Jung. I'm not within what he's written. I'm building on what he had in a way that he couldn't do. He's more mystical than I was. Not that I don't have that tendency. I played a lot of football and rugby, and so it makes me much more action oriented, trying to get these ideas out. And I've got some more ideas that I might will talk with you about some other time, but I think there are ways to be able to make this synchronicity idea much broader in the global mind than writing books, which are very, very helpful. And having groups meet, like the Coincidence Cafe, which are helpful, but they're slow. And we need to be able to get this out there faster. As you're saying, eh, things are turning over really quickly, and we got to go with it.
Yeah, one way would be, Bernie, if we could get Hollywood interested in making movies about synchronicity. People would love them. A whole series on synchronicity of how, where, when, and why people that ships in the night pass. The average person, when I stop them, you know what they say to me, and I engage them. I ask them, "Where you from? What are you doing here?" Those are my two basic questions to introduce myself. Hi, my name's Ken. What's your name? Where are you from? I'm in Florida 6 months, so everybody's from someplace else. And so 99% of the people, without a doubt, have a synchronicity story. They tell me right back when I start going into the subject of synchronicity. And they always say to me, "Oh, I believe in that." And here's what I say back. Uh, Mary, Jim, John, I don't think you believe it. I think you know it. And then they smile. You're right. I know it because they have had them. It's not, it's ubiquitous. That's the best way. Everyone, everywhere, every time, every place, people are having them all. Rare that I meet someone and says to me, "Oh, I've never had anything like that happen." No, no, I got to become all ears after I give them one story. And then they come back. They come back with great stories to
You are a coincidence ambassador.
me.
You are Dr. Synchronicity, and you are getting people to be alert to their own. So you're, again, that catalyst, that enzyme that is making people recognize the reality of the synchronicity experiences they're having. And that's wonderful work. That's wonderful work, Ken. And I thank you for that.
I'm sure you get letters too. You must get letters. I get a lot of letters from people all around the world. When they read the book, they share their stories with me. I know you got hundreds of them, but very recently I got a letter from a lady who says, I never write to anybody, but I got to tell you my story, and I'll wrap it up quick. She says, my husband passed away. I sold my house. I was in a state of despair and depression. I walk into the local library on Shelter Island, it was, and the librarian looks at me and she knows me and she says, come with me. She says, where? She says, just come with me. So she takes her in the library and she pulls out my book. She says, read this book. This book is going to help you. So the lady reads the book, obviously, she reads it. She writes me this most beautiful letter. How at the lowest point in her life, she got hope by reading the stories of other people and what they experienced. So just a month ago, she arranged for me to speak on Shelter Island. I went out and they gave a talk. The very next day, Judy and I are walking along the water. A lot of those encounters happen by water, by the way. That's why I got the ocean behind me. In Florida, I walk the beach every day. That's where I get my stories. And this lady's ready to back her car up into my car. And she's maybe 12 inches away. And I scream out, lady, stop. So here's the deal. We've got the same year, make, model, color car. I said, boy, I go over to her. I said, the insurance company's going to have a tough time figuring out who hit who here. But it didn't happen. All right. And I said, that sounds like it's synchronistic that you have the car and I have the car. And I give her my card. I said, I wrote a book about this. I'm not shy, by the way. I whip out card. I give my cards out with my books on them all the time. Anyway, the lady looks at it and says, I read your book. I said, really? And that's happened at least a dozen times to me. You've already read my book? I said, where do you work? How did you get it? She says, I'm a librarian. I says, do you know so-and-so? She said, yeah, I'm the one who gave her the book. You can't, come on. But why did I meet her, Bernie? I met this young woman, and, she's like maybe 30 years old, 28, I don't know. She says, I want to write my own book. Do you know anybody who could help me? So I connected it to my editor. I said, so that's why we met today, so I could help you get it connected to the editor, so now you could put your story into the world. But I'm saying, Judy and I were just laughing, like, what's the likelihood of that? So here's my new expression. When people say, what's the mathematics behind that, Ken? I say 0 to Slim, and Slim left town. Basically 0 to none, that she was going to bang into my car, and I just walked over and she's the one. I said, how did that book even get in the library? I never gave it to the library. She says, well, the head librarian bought it and she donated it to the thing. But I knew that day when so-and-so came into with the look on her face, and I had known her, that this book was helping. And now this lady and I are very close friends. I mean, she's going to arrange for me to speak to 100 women in Florida come the next spring. I'm laughing. Again, here's what I feel. If you stay in flow consciousness, you don't have to go out looking. It'll come to you.
And
that's
you're
my experience. More and more. Just comes.
And you're doing it. And you're doing it. I really very much appreciate knowing better what you're doing, because I tend to stay home and write stuff and try to figure out stuff. I'm not out there that way. And you are really mixing it up with the people. And it's wonderful that you're doing that. And I can see where you're talking about movies, and we're going to end. I'll tell you something else after we end about what I'm doing in that direction. But I think it's time for us to call this show to an end. But is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience before we stop?
I would just tell people to stay aware, awake, and alert. The signs and symbols are everywhere present. Sometimes a bird or a cat or something will show up. A number will be repeated. Look it up. Find what it means. It's the other world from the other side communicating through the veil, through signs, symbols, and people. No one sent into your life by accident. That's what I would want people to remember. Just
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Ken.
I'm very happy to have this opportunity. And if they want to connect with me, they can find my website is drkenharris.com. It'll be on, I'm sure, somewhere.
It'll be underneath the podcast.
Yeah. And I got 3 years of archive health newsletters and maybe 100 podcasts. So they don't want to read the books, they can just listen.
Have you collected and written down stories that you've heard from other people?
Yes, I have a folder of them.
Older of them. Okay.
Yeah. Some of them
Well,
are
if,
even more fantastic than my own. I'm saying, holy Jesus, how could this? It's like it's humbling. Let me just put it that way.
it's humbling and fun too. Let's just say that.
If it's not fun, I won't do it. I'm too old
You
for
want
it.
that? It got to
This
be
is not work.
fun.
This is not work for me. This is, I don't want to say it's a hobby, but it's a calling. You know.
It's a calling. It's a calling. It's a calling. Thank you again, Ken.
Thank you, Bernie. Thanks for having me.